So let's talk about the weekend when the plan did change. So this morning you tweeted a picture of a whiteboard from the Prime Minister's study of what you call Plan B, and you said you showed that to him on the morning of Saturday the 14th of March.
Yeah.
Was that the moment that you told him for the first time that the scientific consensus, as we saw in those earlier SAGE meetings, was wrong?
No, it wasn't the first time. So the data scientist Ben Warner was working in number 10. His brother, coincidentally and thankfully, was working with the NHS to help the NHS with building a whole data system and data dashboard to deal with COVID. He came to me on the 7th of March, and he had been in various meetings about the official plan. And he said to me, I'm really, really worried about this. It seems to me that people, this plan could easily be mad. It could be incredibly destructive. Like, has this really been tested? Have you really thought it all through? Should I and some others start thinking about Plan B?
But when did you tell the Prime Minister that we needed to change direction?
So on the morning of the 12th,
right.
I said, there's all sorts of different things.
But the morning of the 12th, that's a Thursday, wasn't it? That was the first time you told the Prime Minister the scientific consensus is wrong, we need a Plan B.
So on the night of the 11th, I texted the group with the Prime Minister and the Chief Scientific Advisor, and I said, people can see the trajectory and how social distancing will be needed to flatten the curve. Very sensible people, including former CDC officials, etc., and doctors are saying the risks of delay are much, much higher than the risks of going too soon. If we're not going to say tomorrow, starting social distancing today, we're waiting, and effectively just keep telling people to wash hands, there's going to be massive pushback saying, why wait 5 days? Why not move now? Why not flatten earlier? Proposing tomorrow that we delay action until next week will require extremely clear justification with supporting data, models, etc. We'd have to make it public for global scrutiny. So this is on the night of the 11th. This is because, and this is why I and others had this kind of mounting panic about the whole thing.
And were there people in SAGE who shared your view that we were going in the wrong direction, or was there a groupthink that was broadly shared by everyone?
As far as I can tell, as far as I can tell, and as far as I remember, most people in SAGE thought, this fundamental logic was still operative on the 11th and the 12th in SAGE, and this is the reason why I'd been reluctant over the previous week to tell the Prime Minister, I think the advice that we're getting is wrong. Even around the 11th and 12th, as far as I could tell from SAGE and as far as the minutes show, the fundamental assumption remained, we can't do lockdown and we can't do suppression because it just means a second peak later. So on the night of the 11th, I warned, I sent that message and said, if we're not going to... So on the 11th, it became clear that, which became a running feature of the whole thing, that contrary to our expectations, all sorts of things which we thought were in train actually were not in train. So on the 11th, there was pushback from within the system against advising the following day, i.e. the 12th, to say stay at home if you've got symptoms. And me and others were realizing at this point the system is basically delaying announcing all of these things because there's not a proper plan in place. And the justification is, it doesn't really matter if it's now or in a week's time. But actually, if the whole logic doesn't work, and essentially these things have been delayed simply because there hasn't been the planning and the preparation made. I wanted this to announce on the 12th,
okay,
the individuals stay at home, and also to push through the household quarantine as well.
Let me just ask you briefly, how do we stop that happening in the future? Because there was a consensus about the way to do things. We know now with the benefit of hindsight that was wrong, but how would you change the structures and systems to prevent that kind of thing happening for a future pandemic?
I mean, that's obviously a huge question. I think there's absolutely no doubt at all that the process by which SAGE was secret, and overall the whole thinking around the strategy was secret, was an absolutely catastrophic mistake, because it meant that there wasn't proper scrutiny of the assumptions behind and the underlying logic behind it. Actually, SAGE agreed about this. You know, when I said on the 11th, we're going to have to make all these models public and whatnot, there wasn't pushback from SAGE, and there wasn't pushback from Patrick Vallance either. Patrick actually agreed with me. And when I said we should just publish the code for the models so people can actually play with the code themselves and see what the hell these models are, Patrick also agreed and said to SAGE that we should do that. The problem is, by the time we were doing this, it was too late. By the 11th to 12th, we'd already gone terribly wrong. Now, if you see this document here, in terms of your previous question, Jeremy,
what is the document?
This is from a COBRA document and a dashboard document. It actually was in various documents over this time period. I put it on my Twitter feed, but it has this graph here. This was the logic from SAGE, and this was the logic in the Department of Health at the time. You see, the black line there is do nothing. The blue line there is do a little bit. The green line is do a kind of Wuhan style, not necessarily Wuhan, but in that direction, suppression essentially. And as it says, very stringent social behavioural interventions, such as those in China, have the potential to prevent major epidemic establishing, but risks large epidemic re-establishing. The advised approach seeks to avoid this possibility. So this is actually after the crucial meetings on the 13th and the 14th. This graph kept appearing 15th, 16th, 17th. This remained the official logic for days.
You've described the behavioural scientists who advised SAGE on SPY-B, I think it was, as charlatans, and been very critical of the advice they got about how people would react to a lockdown. Did you at the time commission research to challenge that view?
So we definitely did challenge it. Just to correct that, I didn't say that everybody involved with SPY-B were charlatans, and that's not the case. The problem is that in this field of behavioural science, there are a lot of charlatans. And anybody who's been involved with the political world knows that the whole field is riddled with duff studies, memes that people believe are true but aren't true. And there's no doubt whatsoever that this actually was a critical part of the false groupthink. One of the critical things that was completely wrong in the whole official thinking in SAGE and in the Department of Health in February, March was the British public will not accept a lockdown. Secondly, the British public will not accept what was thought of as a kind of East Asian style track and trace type system and the infringements of liberty around that. Those two assumptions were completely central to the official plan and were both obviously completely wrong.